anything!
Ma'am, stop resisting.
Copy you.
Hands behind your back! She said she's congressional. Shut it. Secure her now. National security exception. No warrant needed.
What are you doing? Get off me!
Ma'am, you need to come with us now.
No, this is a mistake. Let go!
3 black Chevrolet Suburbans screeched to a halt in front of the 2-story Colonial on Magnolia Lane. Tires bit into the pavement hard enough to leave marks. Doors flew open before the engines stopped running. 6 men in tactical gear poured out with weapons drawn, their boots hitting the ground like war drums. The woman on the driveway was holding a newspaper in one hand and a cup of coffee in the other. She wore yoga pants and a faded Spelman College sweatshirt. Her hair was wrapped in a silk scarf. She had been awake for exactly 12 minutes. In 24 hours, all 6 of these agents would lose their badges, their pensions, and their futures. A regional director who had terrorized communities for 2 decades would be facing federal charges. The Secretary of Homeland Security would issue a public apology, and the President of the United States would sign an executive order that changed immigration enforcement forever. But right now, in this moment, the woman on the driveway was simply a target. "On the ground! Now!" The command came from the lead agent, a thick-necked man with pale eyes and a crew cut so tight it looked painted on. His name was Garrett Womack. He had served under Regional Director Victor Pilsner for 11 years. He had conducted over 300 raids. He had never once questioned an order. If this satisfies your curiosity and appetite for justice-driven stories, that subscribe button is waiting. Tap it now. Future stories like this one land for subscribers first. If you choose not to subscribe, drop a comment and tell us why. We genuinely want to know. The woman didn't move. Her coffee cup stayed level. Her voice stayed steady. "I am Congresswoman Zora Bellamy Hutchins, representing Georgia's 5th Congressional District. I sit on the House Homeland Security Committee. Identify yourselves and state your purpose." Womack hesitated for exactly 1 second. 1 second where training met reality and reality lost. He had been told this was a routine operation. He had been told the target was harboring undocumented individuals. He had been told not to ask questions. He hadn't been told she was a sitting member of Congress. But he was too deep now, too committed. 6 agents with weapons drawn on a suburban driveway at 6:42 in the morning. Neighbors beginning to peek through curtains. The operation was already blown if he backed down. Pilsner would have his badge by noon. So Garrett Womack made the decision that would destroy his life. On the ground. Final warning. Congresswoman Bellamy Hutchins set her coffee cup down on the hood of her car. She placed her newspaper beside it. She raised both hands slowly, deliberately, showing her palms. "I am complying peacefully. I want to see a warrant. I want your badge numbers. I want—" Womack moved before she finished. His shoulder caught her in the sternum. Her body left the ground for a full second before her back slammed into the concrete driveway. The coffee cup shattered somewhere behind her. Her skull bounced against the pavement with a sound that made one of the younger agents flinch. "Hands behind your back!" She couldn't breathe. The impact had emptied her lungs completely. Womack's knee drove into her spine as his hands wrenched her arms backward. The handcuffs bit into her wrists hard enough to draw blood. Her cheek pressed against the cold concrete, and she felt something warm running from her lip down toward her chin. "We have reason to believe you're harboring undocumented individuals." Womack's voice was close to her ear now. "National security exception. We don't need a warrant." There was no national security exception. There were no undocumented individuals. There was nothing but a lie designed to humiliate a woman who had dared to speak the truth about powerful men. Zora Bellamy Hutchins knew all of this. She had spent 8 years as a civil rights attorney. She had argued cases before the Supreme Court. She understood exactly how illegal this arrest was, even as her face pressed into her own driveway. But understanding the law and being protected by it were 2 very different things. "Oh, you're making a mistake," she managed to say through bloodied lips. "A mistake you cannot take back." Womack laughed. It was a short, ugly sound. "Lady, I don't make mistakes." He didn't notice the curtain move in the upstairs window. He didn't see the phone pressed against the glass. He didn't realize that a 16-year-old girl named Imani was watching everything, her hands trembling but her finger steady on the livestream button. 43,000 followers were watching. That number was climbing by the second. By the time they loaded Congresswoman Bellamy Hutchins into the back of a Suburban, The live stream had reached 90,000 viewers. By the time they pulled away from the driveway, it had crossed 200,000. Comments were exploding faster than anyone could read them. Screen recordings were already spreading to other platforms. Garrett Womack believed he was sending a message. He believed he was doing his job. He believed that power protected power, the way it always had. He had no idea that a teenager with a phone had just handed 11 million people a front-row seat to his destruction. Odessa Bellamy's hands told the story of her life better than any words could. The knuckles were swollen to twice their natural size. The fingers curved inward at angles that made strangers wince. The skin was rough and cracked, mapped with scars from decades of work that never stopped and never paid enough. She had worked the overnight shift at a chicken processing plant in Pritchard, Alabama for 27 years. The cold, the repetitive motion, and the standing in one place for 8 hours straight while her body slowly broke down around her. She came home every morning with hands so damaged that her daughter would heat olive oil on the stove and massage them gently before school. That daughter grew up to argue cases before the Supreme Court. Zora Bellamy Hutchins learned early that survival required sacrifice. Her mother gave her body to a job that paid $9 an hour. Her father gave his heart to a congregation that couldn't afford to fix the church roof. And Zora decided, somewhere around the age of 8, that she would give her mind to the fight, because fighting was the only thing that ever changed anything. Her father, Reverend Booker Bellamy, he pastored a church in Pritchard, where 37 people gathered every Sunday in a building with no air conditioning and buckets positioned strategically to catch the rain. He preached about justice when justice seemed impossible. He preached about hope when hope felt naive. He preached about a God who saw what powerful men tried to hide. He died when Zora was 11 years old. She watched it happen. Front row of the church, sitting between her mother and her grandmother, when Reverend Bellamy stopped mid-sentence. His hand went to his chest. His eyes found his daughter's face. And then he fell, collapsing behind the pulpit like a puppet with its strings cut. His last words, the ones he managed to speak before his heart gave out, were these: "The Lord sees what man ignores." Zora carried those words like a compass for the next 35 years. She graduated valedictorian from a high school where the textbooks were 15 years old and half the pages were missing. She earned a full scholarship to Spelman College, where she majored in political science and graduated summa cum laude. She got into Harvard Law School on a full ride and finished magna cum laude while working 2 jobs to send money home to her mother. Every step forward was a step taken on broken ground. Every achievement was purchased with sacrifice that most people would never see or understand. After law school, she clerked for a federal judge in the 11th Circuit. Then she joined the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, where she spent 8 years fighting cases that nobody else wanted to touch. Of voting rights, housing discrimination, police brutality, the cases that made powerful people uncomfortable. 2 of those cases went all the way to the Supreme Court. Zora Bellamy Hutchins stood in that marble chamber and argued before 9 justices that certain Americans were being treated as less than citizens. She won both times. Both decisions expanded voting rights protections for communities that had been systematically shut out of democracy. At 46, she ran for Congress. She won by 23 points. She won again 2 years later by 28, and again by 31. Georgia's 5th congressional district sent her to Washington because they knew she would fight for them the way she had been fighting her entire life. She joined the House Judiciary Committee. She joined the House Homeland Security Committee. And she built a reputation for asking questions that made people squirm and demanding answers that powerful agencies preferred to keep hidden. 3 weeks before that morning on her driveway, Congresswoman Bellamy Hutchins stood on the floor of the House of Representatives and delivered a speech that would change everything. She called for an investigation into immigration and customs enforcement operations in the southeastern United States. She cited documented cases of American citizens detained for hours based on nothing but their appearance. She named families torn apart by raids that violated basic constitutional protections. And she named one man specifically. Regional Director Victor Pilsner, she said, her voice carrying across the chamber, operates like a warlord accountable to no one. He has turned a federal agency into his personal instrument of terror, and this Congress has a responsibility to stop him. The speech was broadcast live on C-SPAN, Clips circulated on social media for days. Pilsner's name trended on Twitter for 36 hours. Zora Bellamy Hutchins thought she was demanding accountability. She thought she was doing the job her constituents had elected her to do. She thought that speaking the truth, backed by evidence, in the halls of Congress, would be protected by the institutions that were supposed to make democracy work. She didn't realize she had just declared war on a man who had spent 20 years destroying everyone who challenged him. She didn't know that Victor Pilsner was already planning his response. She didn't understand that in 3 weeks, she would be face down on her own driveway, bleeding from her lip, with a federal agent's knee in her spine. But she would learn, and when she did, she would make sure Victor Pilsner learned something too. The Confederate flag hung in the garage of the Pilsner family home for 31 years. It was positioned so that young Victor could see it every time he took out the trash, every time he retrieved his bicycle, every time he passed through that space between the house and the outside world. His father, Raymond Pilsner, had served 24 years with the Border Patrol before retiring on disability. He kept the flag as a reminder of what he called the natural order, a phrase he used so often it became background noise in Victor's childhood. Raymond Pilsner believed certain people belonged in certain places. He believed the civil rights movement had been, in his words, the beginning of the end. He believed that law enforcement was the last line of defense against a country that was losing itself, and he raised his son to believe all of these things too. Victor absorbed every lesson. He joined Immigration and Customs Enforcement in 2003, 2 years after the agency was reorganized under the Department of Homeland Security. He was 32 years old, freshly divorced, looking for a place where his particular skills would be appreciated. He found exactly what he was looking for. ICE in those early years was an agency still finding its identity. The chaos of post-9/11 restructuring had created opportunities for ambitious men who understood that brutality could be disguised as strength. Victor Pilsner understood this better than most. He rose through the ranks, not because he was competent, but because he was willing to conduct raids that other agents hesitated to execute, willing to detain people that other agents knew were probably citizens, willing to separate families that other agents found difficult to separate. His supervisors noticed. His performance reviews glowed. By 51, Victor Pilsner commanded the entire southeastern region, 11 states, thousands of agents, a budget measured in hundreds of millions of dollars, and he ran it like his father would have wanted, as a fiefdom where his word was law and his judgment was final. The complaints began almost immediately after his promotion. A community organizer in Birmingham documented a raid on an elementary school where agents detained 3 parents during a PTA meeting while their children watched through classroom windows. The organizer filed a formal complaint. The complaint was investigated for 6 weeks. The investigation was closed without findings. A civil rights attorney in Jacksonville represented an American citizen, born in Miami, raised in Jacksonville, never left the country, who was detained by Pilsner's agents for 9 days, based entirely on his appearance and his last name. The attorney threatened to sue. The case was settled quietly with a non-disclosure agreement. A journalist in Memphis obtained body camera footage showing agents using slurs during a workplace raid at a meatpacking plant. The footage was verified by 3 independent sources. The agents were transferred to desk duty for 2 months, then returned to field operations. 4 formal investigations were opened into Victor Pilsner's civil rights practices. 4 investigations were quietly closed after pressure from political allies in state government. Terrell Givens, Shanice Odom, Cornelius Whitmore, Desiree Benton, names that appeared in complaint files, incident reports, settlement agreements, names of American citizens whose lives were disrupted, damaged, or destroyed by an agency that faced no consequences for its actions. Men like Pilsner count on silence. They count on settlements. They count on investigations that go nowhere and news cycles that move on. If you want to see what happens when the silence breaks, subscribe now. What happens next involves the White House. Victor Pilsner had crushed community organizers. He had silenced local activists. He had outlasted journalists and outmaneuvered attorneys. Every challenge to his authority had been absorbed, deflected, or destroyed. He had no reason to believe that pattern would ever change. Then Congresswoman Zora Bellamy Hutchins said his name on the floor of the House of Representatives. Pilsner watched the speech live from his office in Atlanta. He watched the clips circulate on social media. He watched his name trend on Twitter and his face appear on cable news segments with chyrons like ICE Director under fire and Congresswoman demands accountability. Something shifted in his chest. Not fear. Victor Pilsner did not experience fear the way other people did. Something closer to offense. Something that felt like an insult that required a response. He had destroyed people for less than this. He had ended careers over minor slights. A sitting member of Congress calling him a warlord on national television was not something he could let stand. The planning began within 48 hours of the speech. Garrett Womack was the first call. Pilsner's most loyal enforcer, a man who had proven his willingness to execute orders without question. Womack listened to the assignment in silence. He didn't ask about warrants. He didn't ask about legal justification. He didn't ask why a federal agency was about to raid the home of an elected official. He simply said yes. The pretext was thin enough to be transparent. An anonymous tip about undocumented individuals being harbored at the Congresswoman's address. No verification required. No warrant necessary. A national security exception that existed nowhere in actual law, but sounded official enough to survive the first few hours of confusion. Pilsner assumed those first few hours were all he needed. Humiliate the Congresswoman. Let the images circulate of her in handcuffs. Let the whisper network spread that she wasn't untouchable. Then apologize publicly, blame a miscommunication, and let the legal process drag on for years while she learned her lesson about speaking his name. It was a plan that had worked before. It was a plan that assumed the target would be isolated, unsupported, without witnesses who mattered. It was a plan that never accounted for a 16-year-old girl with a phone and 43,000 followers. Victor Pilsner had prepared for lawyers. He had prepared for press releases. He had prepared for congressional inquiries that would take months to convene and years to conclude. He had not prepared for the entire world to watch his agents brutalize a Congresswoman in real time. And by the time he realized his mistake, 11 million people had already seen the evidence that would end his career. 11 million views in 90 minutes. The number kept climbing so fast that Imani Bellamy Hutchins had to refresh her screen 3 times to make sure she wasn't imagining it. Her hands hadn't stopped shaking since she pressed the livestream button. Her phone battery was down to 9%. And her aunt was somewhere in the back of a black Suburban, bleeding from her face, being driven to a destination that nobody would tell her. She was 16 years old. She had started her TikTok account to post dance videos and book reviews. She had 43,000 followers who tuned in for her opinions on young adult novels and her tutorials on natural hair care. Now those followers were watching federal agents assault a United States Congresswoman. The comments moved too fast to read. Screen recordings spread to Twitter within minutes. Someone clipped the moment of impact. Womack's shoulder hitting her aunt's chest, her body leaving the ground. The sickening sound of skull meeting concrete. And that clip alone had been shared 400,000 times before the Suburbans even left the neighborhood. By 7:15 in the morning, every major news network had the footage. By 7:30, congressional offices were fielding calls from reporters demanding statements. By 8 o'clock, and the Speaker of the House had seen the video. So had the Minority Leader. So had the chairs of 6 different committees. And so had the White House. The Chief of Staff walked into the Oval Office at 8:17 with a tablet in her hand and an expression that made the President set down his coffee. "You need to see this," she said. "Now." The President watched the full live stream in silence. 4 minutes and 37 seconds of footage that would reshape federal immigration policy before the week was over. When it ended, he didn't speak for nearly a full minute. "Get me the Secretary of Homeland Security," he finally said. "And get me the Attorney General. I want everyone involved in this identified by noon." The machinery of federal response began grinding into motion. But the real earthquake was happening inside ICE headquarters in Atlanta, where Regional Director Victor Pilsner was watching his career collapse in real time. His phone had started ringing at 6:50 and hadn't stopped since. Calls from deputies, calls from attorneys, calls from political allies who were suddenly very concerned about their association with him. He let them all go to voicemail while he watched the view count climb and felt something cold settle into his stomach. This wasn't supposed to happen. The plan was clean. Humiliate the Congresswoman, issue an apology, blame miscommunication. He had done versions of this before. It always worked. The targets were always isolated. The witnesses were always easy to discredit. The story always faded. But this story wasn't fading. It was spreading. Every minute brought new screenshots, new clips, new angles. Someone had already created a slow-motion breakdown of the tackle. Someone else had transcribed every word Womack said and posted it with commentary. A law professor at Georgetown had gone on cable news to explain exactly which federal statutes had been violated. Victor Pilsner was watching himself become a symbol of everything wrong with immigration enforcement in America. And then, the emails leaked. Comment below. Do you think the person who leaked those emails did the right thing? Or should they have stayed loyal to their agency? Tell us what you would have done. Agent Terence Holloway was 31 years old. He had served with ICE for 3 years after completing 2 tours in Afghanistan with the Army. He came from a military family. His father had been a colonel. His grandfather a sergeant in Vietnam. He believed in institutions. He believed in chain of command. He believed that following orders was how organizations functioned. But he also believed that some orders were illegal. Holloway had been present during the planning meeting for the Bellamy Hutchins operation. He had heard Pilsner describe the Congresswoman as a hostile political actor who needed corrective action. He had watched Womack nod along without asking a single question about warrants or legal justification. He had felt something twist in his gut, but said nothing because saying something meant ending his career. Now, watching the footage alongside 11 million other people, Terence Holloway made a decision. He walked into the Atlanta field office at 9:45 in the morning. He asked to speak with the Inspector General's representative. He brought his laptop with him, and he handed over every email, every message, every document that proved the raid was not a mistake, but a deliberate act of political retaliation ordered directly by Victor Pilsner. The smoking gun was a message sent at 11:17 p.m. on March 4th, 3 days before the arrest. It read, "The Congresswoman has made herself a target. Time to remind her that there are consequences for attacking this agency. Proceed with the operation. Do not request warrant. National security exception will cover." That message would eventually be read aloud in a federal courtroom. But first, it would be read by the Secretary of Homeland Security, the Attorney General, and the President of the United States. By noon, Victor Pilsner's political allies had stopped returning his calls. By 2 o'clock, his attorney advised him to prepare for criminal charges. By 4 o'clock, the Secretary of Homeland Security had scheduled a press conference for the following morning. Congresswoman Bellamy Hutchins was released from ICE custody at 10:23 a.m., approximately 3 hours and 40 minutes after her arrest. She had been held in a processing facility, never formally charged, never given access to an attorney. Her face was swollen. Her lip required 4 stitches. Her wrists showed deep purple bruises where the handcuffs had cut into her skin. She walked out of that facility and directly into a crowd of reporters, cameras, and supporters who had gathered after seeing the live stream. She did not cry. She did not rage. She stood before those cameras with her injuries visible and her voice steady. "What happened to me this morning happens to people across this country every single day," she said. "The only difference is that this time, the whole world saw it. I will not rest until every American is protected from this kind of abuse, and I will not be silenced by men who believe their badges make them untouchable." The clip of that statement was viewed 27 million times by midnight. Inside his office, Victor Pilsner watched it 3 times. He understood, finally, that he had miscalculated. He had spent 20 years destroying people who challenged him. He had crushed organizers and activists and attorneys. He had survived 4 investigations without a scratch. But he had never gone after someone whose destruction the whole world was watching. He had never attacked a target who could fight back with the full weight of Congress behind her, and he had never imagined that his own agents would betray him. By hour 20, Victor Pilsner knew his career was over. He just didn't know yet how completely Congresswoman Bellamy Hutchins would dismantle everything he had built. The Secretary of Homeland Security stood at a podium bearing the department's seal. Behind her, the flags of the United States and the department hung motionless. In front of her, 200 journalists waited with cameras rolling and recorders running. It was 9 o'clock in the morning, exactly 26 hours after Congresswoman Bellamy Hutchins had been thrown onto her own driveway. "I am here to announce immediate personnel actions resulting from yesterday's unlawful detention of Congresswoman Zora Bellamy Hutchins," the secretary began. Her voice was flat, controlled, but her eyes carried the weight of what she was about to say. Regional Director Victor Pilsner has been terminated from federal service, effective immediately. His pension has been forfeited. The Department of Justice is pursuing federal civil rights charges against him. She paused to let the words land. Agent Garrett Womack has been terminated from federal service, effective immediately. His pension has been forfeited. He faces assault charges in addition to civil rights violations. Another pause. 4 additional agents present during the incident have been terminated and are under investigation for their roles in this unlawful action. The Secretary looked directly into the cameras. Let me be absolutely clear. No federal agent has the authority to detain an American citizen without proper legal process. No federal agent has the authority to target an elected official for political reasons. And no federal employee, at any level, is above the law or beyond accountability. This department will not tolerate abuse of power. This department will not protect those who violate the rights of the people they are sworn to serve. In her home in Decatur, Zora Bellamy Hutchins watched the press conference with her mother beside her. Odessa had arrived from Alabama the previous evening, helped onto a flight by church members who had seen the video and refused to let her travel alone. She sat in her wheelchair now, her damaged hands folded in her lap, watching her daughter receive the justice she had spent a lifetime fighting for. 2 hours after the press conference, the Secretary called Congresswoman Bellamy Hutchins personally. On behalf of the Department of Homeland Security and the United States government, I apologize for what happened to you, the Secretary said. It was wrong. It was illegal, and it will not be forgotten. Zora accepted the apology with grace, but she also made something clear. Apologies don't change systems, she said. Accountability does. I expect this department to support the reforms necessary to ensure this never happens to anyone else. The Secretary agreed. 3 days later, the President signed an executive order launching a comprehensive review of ICE operational authority. The order mandated new oversight mechanisms, required judicial warrants for all enforcement actions against American citizens, and established an independent review board for complaints of civil rights violations. It was the most significant reform of immigration enforcement in 2 decades. Agent Terrence Holloway, the whistleblower who had provided the emails that ended Pilsner's career, faced retaliation from colleagues who called him a traitor. He was transferred to a desk position in a regional office far from Atlanta. But after public outcry, and after Congresswoman Bellamy Hutchins personally intervened, he was reassigned to the Inspector General's office, tasked with identifying other agents who had abused their authority. I didn't do it for recognition, Holloway said in a rare interview. I did it because my grandfather didn't fight in Vietnam so that federal agents could terrorize American citizens in their own driveways. Some orders you follow, some orders you refuse, and some orders you expose. Imani Bellamy Hutchins, the 16-year-old whose live stream changed everything, watched her follower count climb to over 2 million in the weeks after the incident. She received scholarship offers from 6 universities. She was interviewed by national magazines. She was offered a book deal. She turned down most of it. Instead, she spent her summer interning for a civil rights organization, learning how to channel the attention she had received into work that would outlast any viral moment. Her aunt told her something during that summer that she would carry for the rest of her life. The camera is a tool, Congresswoman Bellamy Hutchins said, but tools don't change the world. People do. Never forget that you were the one who chose to press that button. The phone was just waiting for you to be brave enough to use it. 6 months after the incident, Congresswoman Bellamy Hutchins introduced legislation on the floor of the House. The Accountability and Enforcement Act required judicial warrants for all immigration enforcement actions against American citizens, established criminal penalties for civil rights violations by federal agents, and created a national database of complaints against immigration officers. The bill passed the House by 47 votes. It passed the Senate by 12. The President signed it into law on the 1-year anniversary of Zora's arrest. 1 week after the signing ceremony, Zora traveled to Pritchard, Alabama. She drove down roads she remembered from childhood, past the chicken processing plant where her mother had worked, past the underfunded school where she had been valedictorian, past the corner store where she used to buy penny candy with coins her father gave her after Sunday service. She stopped at a small cemetery behind a church with a roof that no longer leaked, repairs she had paid for anonymously years ago. Her mother was beside her, pushed in her wheelchair by a home health aide who waited respectfully by the car. Zora stood before her father's grave. The headstone was simple. Reverend Booker Bellamy, beloved husband and father. The Lord sees what man ignores. You were right. Daddy, Zora said quietly. The Lord does see, but sometimes you have to make man see it too. Sometimes you have to stand up even when they knock you down. Sometimes you have to bleed so that others don't have to. She felt her mother's hand reach up and take hers. Those damaged, beautiful hands that had worked so hard for so long. He would be proud of you, baby, Odessa said. He is proud of you. Zora nodded. She didn't wipe away the tears that rolled down her cheeks. She let them fall onto the grass of her father's grave, watering the ground where he rested. Then she turned, helped her mother back to the car, and drove home to continue the work. The moral of this story is carved into the American experience itself. No title protects you. No achievement shields you. No amount of success guarantees that powerful men won't try to tear you down. But courage is contagious. Witnesses matter. And accountability, though it often arrives late, can arrive completely when enough people refuse to look away. Victor Pilsner spent 20 years believing he was untouchable. He believed his badge made him powerful, and his cruelty made him strong. He was wrong. Real power isn't the ability to destroy people. Real power is the ability to survive destruction and come back stronger. Zora Bellamy Hutchins survived the 9th Ward of Pritchard, Alabama. She survived losing her father at 11 years old. She survived underfunded schools and impossible odds. She survived Harvard Law and hostile courtrooms and political attacks designed to end her career. And she survived 17 minutes on her own driveway with her face pressed into concrete and blood running from her lip. But surviving was never enough for Zora. She didn't just survive. She transformed every wound into a weapon. She turned every attack into an opportunity. And she made sure that the people who tried to silence her ended up amplifying her voice instead. That's the lesson. Not that justice is guaranteed. It isn't. Not that the system protects everyone equally. It doesn't. But that one person, in one moment, with one decision, can change everything. Imani was one person with one phone. Terence Holloway was one agent with one conscience. Zora Bellamy Hutchins was one woman with one unbreakable will. Together they proved that the untouchable can be touched, the powerful can fall, and the arc of history bends toward justice only when enough people grab it and pull. If this story moved you, if it made you think, if it reminded you that accountability is possible even when power tries to crush it, subscribe now and turn on notifications. More stories like this one are coming. Stories of courage, stories of survival, stories of ordinary people who refuse to accept extraordinary injustice. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it today. Drop a comment below and tell us what this story meant to you. Your words might inspire someone else who is fighting their own battle right now. Until next time.